All right, we are live. Hey there, everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon here at Boost Point headquarters in Pennsylvania for this webinar. Excited about today's topic. I've got Vince Mole here with me. He is Boost Point's head of product. Vince, thanks for joining me.
Glad to join you.
Awesome. Everyone attending here, thanks so much for taking the time to spend a little bit of time here with us this afternoon. Excited about today's topic. So we're going to be talking about navigating the tight labor market, looking at some of the numbers in January's job reports and what that might mean for your hiring outlook, for the remainder of this year. So excited to jump into this topic.
Let's do it.
So let's first go over some of the numbers. So in January, the report showed that 517,000 non-pharma jobs were added, which was far higher than the estimate of 187,000. So this baffled a lot of economists because, again, there was over double the jobs were added than what they were expecting, kind of in the headlines right now. And we're all kind of wondering this looming recession, what could happen there, a lot of that going on, but yet, you're seeing such a tight labor market. And I know a lot of people are trying to kind of reconcile these two things and, trying to predict what your hiring strategy and estimates could look like for this year. It's a challenge for a lot of companies.
Absolutely. And it depends on what industries you're in, but I think the term resiliency is really important thing with the economy in general. There are some sectors in which aren't doing as well as others. Think of like the housing and construction market. Even though they're still adding jobs, obviously everybody knows with interest rates increasing that the housing market's really gotten hit. But when you look at restaurants and hospitality and leisure, they brought on 130,000 jobs in January alone.
Yeah, so let's look at kind of dissecting some of the industries and sectors, particularly. Just gonna do a quick reminder here as well. We're gonna do Q&A at the end. Was gonna mention this at the beginning. So if there's any questions that you have kind of throughout as we're going here, we're gonna keep about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this for Q&A. So feel free to pipe those in at the Q&A section, and we'll get to those afterwards. But yeah, like you mentioned, some of the biggest categories where jobs were added was leisure and hospitality, 128,000 jobs there. Business services, government, healthcare as well was a big one with 58,000 jobs added. One of the common denominators I'm seeing here is a lot of these are like hourly types of positions or blue collar types of jobs as well. Mm-hmm. Those seem to be the jobs that are kind of the toughest market right now as far as employers, the jobs to try to fill versus maybe technology jobs.
Well, and it kind of makes sense if we go back 2 years where some of us were fortunate enough to keep our jobs during the pandemic, but a lot of people were unfortunately not able. So if you were a bartender, if you worked at a restaurant, if you were in a hotel, a lot of those businesses were shut down. So a lot of those employees were then picked up by other businesses, which were working during the pandemic. However, fast forward to over the past probably 12 months, those businesses are still trying to recoup the jobs that they had lost pre-pandemic.
Correct. Like some of these sectors are still not at pre-pandemic numbers yet.
You got it. And a lot of the companies that operated during the pandemic maybe have doubled. Like a lot of tech companies have doubled, their employee count, their head count from 2000, the beginning of the pandemic until now.
I mean, the other data point I wanted to mention here is like the unemployment rate down to 3.4%, which is the lowest it's been since 1969. And again, that's just another indicator as far as how tight the labor market is right now. If you're out there trying to hire, in January, February here, these numbers, this is why it's hard to find those candidates that are the perfect fit for your positions.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of passive job seekers that are out there. A lot of people that are fully employed but are open to other positions. But when you have little under 4% unemployment rate, which equates to about little less than 6 million people total. And from what I read, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has really good information. That's where we got a lot of this information from. But about 2 million people actively looking for jobs right now.
And over 11 million job openings in the US.
You don't have to be a math major to figure out it's really tight market right now.
A pretty big gap.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big gap. So layoffs has been something in a lot of the headlines the past 3 months or so. When you look at that, it's mostly in the technology space. Facebook going through a round of layoffs. I think it was in November. Google following suit, Apple as well, I believe. And I know that can be a little unsettling sometimes for people in HR and TA. You see some of the biggest brands in America going through these rounds of layoffs, and it's like, should we be doing the same? I think is one of the questions. But let's dig into that further a little bit. Like, again, most of this being in the technology space. Vince, you've been in the technology space for a couple decades now. Right. Talk a bit about technology jobs and some of what we've been seeing there with the big layoffs and the transfer of jobs and things like that in the technology space.
Sure. One thing to keep in mind when you look at the layoffs relative to these the large tech companies is the denominator. So a lot of these companies that might be laying off tens of thousands, they might have hired 250,000 people during the pandemic. So to lay off 5% of your workforce is probably just right sizing for them. They probably were built for growth, zero rate economy. They wanted to grow as fast as they could, and money was essentially cheap. So they're just right sizing. Fortunately for a lot of the engineers or people that get laid off from those companies, they're getting relatively good severances. So some of the severances could be 10 to 18 weeks long, and they help with job seeking and everything like that. So a lot of those employees, if they're not getting jobs right now, it looks like by about the summertime, the tech field will probably be back to fully employed. Yep. Now the rest of the ones that are unemployed right now, as far as in these other segments, that's where we're really, really competitive, and it's going to be like that probably for a long time.
Yeah. I'm just gonna make a note here. The numbers that we're talking about, so this is from the last jobs report. So this is January numbers, what we're mostly talking about here. And so another segment of that related to technology, I noticed, I think it was just under 1,000 jobs were technically lost in the technology space, which I thought was interesting because, Facebook in November, it was 11,000 jobs that just Facebook, that round of layoffs. But what seems to be happening here is it's more a transfer of these technology jobs, just because, you're a software engineer and you're no longer, employed at Facebook. There's a lot of other types of companies that even in the manufacturing space, like I know a lot of these people are going to different industries.
Right.
And finding jobs there. So it's kind of a transfer of jobs, even with these big rounds of layoffs for technology companies.
It really is. And I'm sure a lot of engineers or whoever the technology positions that they get laid off, it may be a breath of fresh air for them. Maybe they're getting out of what are these kind of like technology mills, if you will, at Facebook and Google, where you're just rank and file. But the Deers and Caterpillars of the world are innovating. OpenAI, ChatGPT are these huge opportunities that a lot of traditional businesses, industrial businesses are getting into. So yes, these technologists are getting laid off, but there are a plethora of opportunities out there for them. Yep. I was doing some recruiting during the pandemic, and it was crazy what entry level, software engineering talent was getting offered coming out of college. It was just blowing my mind. And for the small business, or a medium-sized business, it's tough to compete with the Facebook and Googles of the world. So it's probably a sigh of relief, and it'll probably help with a lot of the salary inflation that was being experienced during the pandemic. So hopefully that'll help with a lot of like the recession talk that's going on to help bring down their pay.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of zoom back in times like this as well and see the macro trends, not just the micro trends. And one thing I did notice in looking at, the technology space, particularly in the numbers of these big brands, Facebook, Google, Apple, they went on hiring sprees in 2021 and the beginning of 2022, aggressive hiring. And where they're at right now is still, most of these companies, it's still above the amount of employees that they were pre-pandemic. So again, like you mentioned earlier, it's more of a reset for a lot of these technology companies. Yes, they're laying off a lot of people. It's been unfortunate for a lot of people as well, but there are still jobs available in the market.
Yeah, I doubt the layoffs are over. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another round of layoffs between now and before the end of the year.
So let's, another second I want to spend here is just zooming back a little bit. So you look at the tight labor market overall, again, especially in the manual labor workforce, a lot of in manufacturing, hospitality, blue collar types of positions. This has been, I look at this as like, this has been kind of a problem that's been like coming for a long time. And I don't look at it as, as like COVID was a problem here. You talk to a lot of HR and talent acquisition, professionals in the space. This has been something that they've seen coming with just kind of how the workforce is aging in the US, the baby boomer generation, that was the backbone of the workforce, for decades, that generation aging. Millennial Gen Zs, a lot of kids going to college, they're not looking to, work in a manufacturing or a factory setting so much. And my roots are in the construction industry. And that's been a part of, these trade show topics for over a decade, has been the labor market is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And COVID, what we experienced was just kind of fast forwarded some of those effects. And so again, that's not going to quickly reset, even if we enter into somewhat of a recession here.
No, I mean, there's really only a couple of ways to increase the workforce, immigration and having babies. I mean, other than that, there's just not a whole lot of opportunity there. And like you touched on in the contracting space, a lot of contractors have been struggling. How do we get young people interested in the trades? Fortunately, I think that is something that is changing. And I think it's a matter of economics. I think it's just so expensive for the average person to go to a 4-year college and then come out of college and get a job that can pay the bills. I mean, we're talking about, $100,000 a house payment when you're coming out of college. That's a lot. So fortunately, I think economics are turning students from going to college for 4 years to a trade school where they can learn a trade and probably come out with no debt and get a job as soon as they graduate. But that still doesn't change the fact that that's still a small amount of the population. Right. So yes, these are trends that are probably going to continue to be a problem for any of the skilled labor positions.
So let's talk about, how can companies, talent acquisition teams set themselves up for success kind of in light of this continuing trend of, the labor market just being super, super competitive. What are some thoughts that you have there, Vince?
So I'm obviously going to come at it from the technology perspective. So innovation is a way that you can gain efficiencies. You don't have to be a technologist or be in your engineering department to use technology to gain those efficiencies. So are you evaluating what redundancies that you have in your processes? Do you have processes, right? There's a lot of businesses that have been around for a long time, and they maybe don't even have a standard operating procedure for, say, customer service or for onboarding a new employee. So these are the types of things where if you can acknowledge what is redundant, now you can look at technology to go in there and say, hey, anytime we onboard a new employee, instead of me having to mail something to them or track them down or give them a phone call, why don't we send them a text message along with an email that tells them, here's how you access your W-2 information, here's how you put in your paid time off, here's if you have any insurance questions, those types of things. Those can all be automated. So that leaves extra time for an HR professional or a recruiter or whoever else was typically in charge with that redundant process.
Yeah, recruitment operations is something that is gaining traction a lot. So I come from a sales and marketing background, Vince, and I've seen this, for decades. Sales operations, marketing operations, drives a lot of revenue. Sales and marketing drives revenue for organizations. So it gains a lot of attention. When you get into the details of sales operations and things like that. I think what you're finding now, what I'm excited about in the HR and the talent acquisition space, is people are starting to pay a lot of attention to recruitment operations. Because like you said, there's a lot of gaps right now with a lot of companies that technology can fill within their recruitment operations. Right. Simple things like, hey, what's your candidate experience like? People coming to the careers page of your website, them applying for your positions, quickly getting in touch with, someone that you can schedule an interview or a screening call with. How delayed are those touch points, and how can you speed things up, automate things potentially, and just make it a better experience for the candidate?
Sure. We live in a fast gratification, environment now, where we want, when we want to watch a movie, we want to order it on our TV or Netflix and watch it right away. It's the same thing when you're dealing with a customer support or applying for a position. If you're applying for a position and somebody doesn't get back to you for 24 or 48 hours or more, that is the first experience that applicant is having with your business. Now, if you are lucky enough to schedule an interview, there might be something in the back of their mind thinking like, wow, if it took them this long just to get back to me and I'm a really good candidate, what's the rest of this experience going to be like? But I think that's also understanding, that whole process yourself, live it, experience it. In technology, we call it dog fooding. So you write some software and then you go in and use it yourself. And then you feel the pain of if it doesn't have a nice user interface or user experience. I think a lot of professionals need to take that in and try that.
Yeah, I think another key takeaway is the importance of sourcing passive candidates. Another stat that I thought was kind of blew my mind actually a little bit. So the online job seeking activity has actually declined by 75% over the past 12 months.
Wow.
So that's the amount of people actively searching online, places like Indeed, ZipRecruiter. That traffic, online traffic, has actually declined 75% over the past 12 months. So there's less people out there searching, for looking to find a new job, either employed and looking somewhere else. So the importance of sourcing passive job seekers, those that aren't actively looking for jobs, is going to be super important as you think about hiring over the next 12 months.
Well, that's powerful. I'm not a marketing person, and I know we talk about this a lot with how we run our business, but there's a serendipitous moment where an opportunity meets interest, right? So if I'm fully employed, but I'm seeing this really cool brand, it could be whatever it is, but if I'm seeing it 2, 3, 4 times, and then there is a serendipitous moment where I say, hey, I'm not super happy with where I'm working, or I don't feel like I'm rightly compensated, or I don't feel valued, right? Like that's a big problem in a lot of businesses where some managers will maybe say, hey, I'm just going to pay you more, but I'm not going to pay you any more attention, or give you those fringe benefits that maybe other companies are providing. I think that's the core opportunity with these passive job seekers. Show them how to differentiate, how your business differentiates itself from those other businesses.
Yeah, I think it's important in a tight labor market like this. The scales have tipped a bit. Looking back 5-10 years, the employer maybe had a little bit more leverage in the conversation than the employee. I feel like that scale has shifted a lot to where now you're needing to view your employer brand, your recruitment strategy, almost more so like a sales and marketing strategy, where you're needing to go after the best candidates, progressively interact with your audience, potential employees out there, versus just waiting for them to come to you.
I think as an employer, we sometimes come up with who we think the perfect candidate is. And then you find that perfect candidate, you hire them, and then after 6 months, you say, oh, well, yeah, they're kind of like everybody else, or yes, they look good on paper, but when they actually joined into our environment, maybe they don't fit in as well. And I think that's where a lot of hiring professionals, recruiters, managers need to be creative and start to think about, how do we build a well-rounded team as opposed to a team that looks like all the other team members, talks like all the other team members, thinks like all the other team members. I think that's the opportunity there. But like you said, these are all passive employees. These are all passive job seekers. So how do we differentiate ourselves? What do we do? Do we have upward mobility? Do we allow flexible working from home, right? Is there a daycare stipend? Is there ownership opportunity? You know, there's so many different ways, but that is all about communicating and interacting with your staff. Starting at that first touch point is when you're recruiting them.
100%. So Vince, I'd be curious to hear your perspective from a technology lens. Like, what are some of the most common problems you see, you know, organizations facing right now, maybe through the technology lens in relation to recruiting and hiring?
So from a technology standpoint, from recruiting and hiring, it's probably understanding how to utilize technology. So from a recruiting standpoint, things have been pretty traditional, even over the past probably 15 to 20 years. You have job boards in which you post to, somebody's going to find it, they're going to apply for it. I'll get back to them whenever I can, probably via phone. A lot of that has changed now. Most people, I'd even say probably up to my parents' age, are now getting comfortable enough with SMS. Text messaging, where in most cases, if you don't have to have a full conversation where you're asking for something and somebody can reply back and you can leave it at that, text messaging is a very efficient way of doing that. And you can even share photos, images, or photos, PDFs, and other documents in that way. So I would say utilizing the appropriate communication channel is very important. So many people are getting like spam emails where they might not even be looking at their inbox more than a couple times a week anyway. So I'd say that is a big one. The second one comes back to using the technology for efficiency is automation. So what things can you set up? I'm going to call them triggers for. So when this thing happens, I want to do X. Right. So we'll use Boost Point as an example. A new applicant comes into the system. We will then respond to them with a text message, thanking them for applying for the position and asking what their availability is to schedule an interview. That would be a phone call. It could take 24 hours or more for that to happen. It happens automatically. And what's awesome for the recruiter in that example is that then gets put on their schedule if you're using something like a Calendly. And if you're not familiar with some of these things, again, we can talk about them in the QA or have a follow-up discussion. But these are just a couple little things that can be done utilizing technology in the recruitment space.
I appreciate the practical examples there, Vince, because I know technology, you know, adopting technology. Yes, we've been hearing that for a decade now, over and over again. But I think it really comes down to some of these, pretty simple ideas that can be, again, it can be a very big undertaking to fully implement, if you have a fairly large recruitment team. But I love the example as far as SMS, like just understanding how candidates prefer to communicate now versus, 5, 10, 15 years ago. 90 stat I heard the other day, 93% of people that have an incoming call, and they don't recognize the number, they're not answering it.
Of course. Yeah. Who does? Other than my dad. My dad loves that.
Right. But again, that's the way, Gen Z, millennial, that's the way they're communicating right now. They're not in their email inbox every day. They're hardly listening to voicemails anymore, but text messages, 95% open rate there. And people, that's, the way the majority of people right now prefer to communicate.
Sure. Even not only necessarily with text messaging, but just the text-based messaging. There's a lot of services out there like the Slacks and the Microsoft Teams, where now you're instead of picking up the phone, pressing somebody's extension and talking to them on the phone, I can now send a message to Sam. Doesn't matter where I'm working. I can Slack him over. I can ask him a question. He can reply back. And you're not losing all that time or just the overhead of, okay, maybe they're there, maybe they're not. So utilizing text-based services in general is a great way to communicate internally at scale. And I think that's really what it comes down to. You have to understand your team. Where's everybody working? What's their proximity? What is their technical level?
Yep.
So if you have some people on your team that maybe aren't good with technology, maybe you have something built into your operating procedure that says, hey, when I need to go to Sam because he's not very good with text messaging, we're going to give him a call.
Yep.
Right. So it's not a one size fits all. And maybe that is the challenge, right?
Right.
You can't just put one thing in place and have it work for everybody in your organization.
Yep. Awesome. Well, appreciate the thoughts there, Vince. We're going to transition here in a second to Q&A. So if there's any questions out there from the audience, feel free to pipe those into the Q&A right now. Just kind of wrapping things up a little bit. I think, what we can gather from the January jobs report is, obviously the labor market continues to be extremely competitive.
Mm-hmm.
My prediction is that things will most likely remain that way, throughout the 2023 calendar. And I think it's important not to, overreact maybe to some of the headlines out there with the big, layoffs, especially in the technology space. It's understanding the data and the segments of the data, where, things are still continuing to be even more competitive in the labor market than they were 2-3 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important for everybody to remember, and we're probably not old enough, but interest rates used to be in the double digits. So 10, 11, 12, 13%. So at our current interest rates, around 5%, we're still not in a super restrictive state. So it's not like the economy is going to fall off a cliff right now. Obviously, if they continue to ratchet up, it could get worse. But right now, as things are, we're just normalizing, right?
Yep.
We went through a very extreme time during the pandemic and we're normalizing.
Awesome. All right, let's get to some of the Q&A here. I have a question here. So along the lines of passive candidates, when we touched on passive candidates there, like what are some of the top sources for passive candidates right now? Maybe I'll take this one here, Vince. What we've seen, it's kind of digging into recruitment marketing is kind of the hat that you need to put on when you think of sourcing passive candidates, because again, these people aren't searching places like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, right, where, maybe you've advertised in the past. So it's all right, people that don't know your brand, maybe, how do you get your local workforce to find out who you are and to apply for your open position? So you need to think about recruitment marketing, recruitment advertising. Some of the best platforms that I've seen to do this, you have a lot of potential platforms out there. You've got traditional media, things like billboards, TV ads, signs on buses, things like that. A lot on the digital side as well. You've got Google, Facebook, TikTok, Google ads, YouTube ads, display ads.
The eyeballs are, right?
It's endless. So what I've seen, we've done a lot of testing around recruitment advertising here at Boost Point. And what we've seen gets the most consistent positive ROI are platforms like Facebook and Instagram currently. Like we're always testing. TikTok is another interesting one that's getting some good early traction. But the most consistent that we've seen for getting a positive ROI are Facebook and Instagram. So social media is a big one.
Yeah. And great for conversion as well. Makes it really easy for the applicant.
Here's another great question. Understanding the labor market right now. This one's from Heather. How do you suggest managing candidate expectations? That's a great one. How do you manage candidate expectations? Vince, I'll let you answer this one first. I have a couple thoughts going through my head.
Maybe brief, but short and to the point. I would say with expectations, make sure that you're setting expectations. My wife would call it an upfront contract. So when that applicant comes in, there should be some type of speedy response to them, letting them know that you had received their interest and what the next step or steps are, right? Set that upfront contract with them, put the ball in their court if you need extra information from them. If you don't, then schedule that interview right away, okay? There's obviously a qualifying part. So if they are not qualified, maybe you just want to thank them for their interest, right, and let them know that there are other opportunities available and that maybe you can be in touch if they would like to be interested or if they would like to be notified of those other opportunities. But you need to get the ball rolling early in that process and get them to understand what the next steps are.
That's a great. I was kind of go respond kind of along the same lines, is setting those expectations up right away. And I know it's difficult for recruiting teams because we're sitting here. Another thing I realize is it has been extremely hard to be a recruiter the past
absolutely.
2-3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The expectations for recruitment teams,
understaffed
in most cases. Yes. So the thought of needing to fill more roles, and maybe you haven't even been given the budget that enables you to, sufficiently resource your department, and to think, oh, I need to follow up with more candidates faster. That's where I'll go back to look at the right technology to kind of take the heavy load there with some of that, and be very upfront with candidates. They apply. Maybe there's an automated, like you mentioned, an automated message that you can send out, just letting them know what to expect throughout the hiring journey, the hiring process. But again, there's certain things that you could even automatically schedule an interview potentially. There's ways with technology now, there's ways that you can increase the candidate experience to be better for the candidate and also decrease the time investment from your recruitment team. Yeah. So look for the sweet spot of, hey, how can it increase the candidate experience and also decrease the amount of time investment from my recruiters?
Just to add on to that as well is setting the priority. So as from a recruiting perspective, you need a way to categorize who are your hot leads, your warm leads, and your cold leads, so that you're prioritizing your time to go after those hot leads first, because your need to follow up with a greater number of candidates should get smaller as you fill positions, so that you can cross them off of your list and then move over to those other positions.
Yep.
And it's the same way, I guess, with the positions you need to fill right away. Some positions, yes, we're looking for them, but maybe we're about 90% staff. But if you have a 10%, 25% staff deficiency, maybe those are your hot leads, plus those are the positions you need to fill the first. So sometimes you need to make, if it's a spreadsheet or your ATS system can do that, it's a great way to kind of set the priority of who you should be looking at first.
Moving on to the next question here. I love this question. Literally have zero budget. What ideas do you have? All right. So zero budget here, assuming, you're still needing to fill positions, and that being priority. It's, organic traction, where are the places where you can spend, little or $0 and still, expect some sort of traction. Where my mind went immediately was first of all, look at what resources you do have. Mm-hmm. What every business already has, unless you're starting, from zero, is you have existing employees.
That's right.
And so you have probably existing success stories. You have people that are, excited about the brand, hopefully, and excited about going to work every day. View that as a resource that you can potentially leverage for finding new employees and new positions. So what I would kind of gear towards practically is, strategize what a referral program could possibly look like.
I was just going to say that,
and build that out. Maybe there's, a month or a 2-month promotion, that you can specifically, put out there to your existing employees. And a lot of companies have done this a lot, but look at unique ways that you can leverage this. Like I see a lot of companies that have referral programs, but their messaging of it and advocating of the program is a poster on the wall, that they expect the employees just to see and be totally excited about. Where, hey, maybe you don't even have a text message based communication system, but hey, maybe it's manually texting each one of your employees with a PDF, or even just with text, like, hey, we're looking for someone in so-and-so role. Just some of that manual work, someone might think of, oh yeah, I do have a friend or a family member, that would be a good fit for that position. If you have zero budget, that's what I'd recommend. Another great idea I heard along those lines, this was a year or two ago. I was like, oh, I'm going to put that one in the bank, and remember that is, someone was in the same position, zero budget, needed to recruit. They sat down with each one of their employees and went through their LinkedIn profile with them.
Like it.
It's like, hey,
a great idea.
who's your connections? It could be their LinkedIn profile or their Facebook profile, and just like, scrolling through their Rolodex of contacts.
Yep.
And in the moment, like, oh, I didn't think about that person. Yeah, I'd be willing to send them a message and let them know about the position.
Yeah. I think unfortunately without a budget, it's tough to really scale. So no matter what you're doing, it's probably going to be incremental. So if you have high volume positions that you want to fill, that's probably going to be a challenge. Unfortunately, social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram changed their organic reach. What was about a year or two ago, where you used to be able to really push out content on your social media page organically. To get out to your followers. They very much limited that now. But that doesn't mean that you can't still set up, say, a Facebook page and do a really good job of doing some testimonials like Sam's talking about. Get really good, rich content of you. And you can use your iPhone or your Google device and go around and interview some of your employees. I would stage it, like if you have somebody that knows some videography there, that would help you out. But if you can put some really good content on there and show and allow your employees to spotlight what they love about the company and then grow that organically, that's great content. And tell you the truth, social media loves those types of videos anyway. So maybe that will grow a little bit better than just maybe posting a picture of a stock picture and your benefits.
100%. I love that thought. Yeah. Video content is a great way to engage with the passive job seekers, and don't overthink video, when you're thinking about recruitment advertising. What we've seen perform best on social media platforms is, like Vince mentioned, there's like, grab your iPhone out, do a vertical video, don't hire the media company next door and spend $5,000 on a promo video for your employer brand, to start out with. Maybe eventually, like, hey, if you want something polished for your site, but if you're looking just to get the word out there, leveraging video is a great idea.
Yeah. There are also, last point, there are a lot of free job boards that are out there. Now, you get probably what you put into it, but it doesn't hurt to at least post your positions on job boards, and you never know what you might get.
100%. I agree with that. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we are wrapped up with the questions and our topic for today. So Vince, really appreciate you joining me here today. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And to everyone listening, thanks so much for taking the time with us here on this Tuesday. And we do these webinars fairly routinely, about once a month. So keep your eye out for our next one coming up. Other than that, hope you have a great rest of the week. And thanks again.